Okay, so if you'll join back with all of us, it may have been important to really dig into the actual task. Notice that the task uses the word theme, that it talks about the importance of Greg's relationship with this fish. Thinking like fourth graders, 10-year-olds, I think there's evidence in the text that we can pull out or that we can use as evidence for his relationship with Finn. Those would be the key ideas and details. So if you'll go with me, if you have the actual shared writing piece, we'll just use this one to kind of look at what is expected. And again, this was, oh, that was dumb. Thank you to my, yes, my tech expert here, yes. Yes, yes. Much more than a van, much more. Okay, here we go. Thanks for bearing with us. Thank you. So starting off the text-dependent analysis essay with one lucky fish. One thing that's important to note is encouraging our students to actually use words from the task. So taking words from the task and restating it to guide their writing, to guide their thinking so that their writing has an organization and a flow. Also, hopefully you noted that stating the title again, and it certainly does not hurt for our middle school students, and I would encourage it that you actually include the author where it's applicable. Then looking at the shared piece, before Greg even brought Finn home, the organization of it where it actually uses transitions. Also important. Again, when we think about these components of being a writer and composing, they're not new. All of our students have knowledge of putting together their thoughts and then organizing it in a way so that it makes sense for the reader and addressing the task. And then looking at the bottom, the last little paragraph, as you can see, an opportunity to wrap it up and bring it back together. In other words, from my experience thus far with looking at lots and lots of samples, there's not much room for a level of creativity. There's not a level of creativity that we encourage most days in Writer's Workshop. That being said, I think that we can encourage our students where their creativity comes out is what evidence is most important to address the task. Are they choosing, and so they're using their creativity to actually be selective, right? Picking out what is most applicable for the task. That's going to require a lot of thinking, but also a lot, in my mind, of annotating and marking up, right? Now, our kids are taking this digitally, so they're going to need opportunities to have that experience and exposure, but then also making sure that they're aware that they can have that blank piece of paper right with them, and they should, absolutely should, and that's allowed for taking the M step, to actually have that right with them to do their thinking and their planning, okay? They do that hard work, we know that composing it, keyboarding-wise, that'll come. That won't be the hard part. But if they just sit down and try to start scribing it out, I imagine that they're going to run into a little bit more of a challenge, okay? So as you can see, the shared one that we did as ELA leaders was 5 short paragraphs to address the task. And then we gave ourselves the charge of actually annotating it as a score, to actually say how would it have been scored up against the rubric. One point since then was I noticed that one lucky fish should be underlined. And our students, if they're doing it with keyboarding, can use italics. That's something about the grammar piece that will aid our students in looking at being proficient as to just almost there, okay? And then the actual using of quotation marks when you're picking out certain key evidence and details. Now, is that going to make or break a student with their work? Not necessarily so, but it certainly makes it a lot easier for the reader and the scorer, those that are interested audience, to actually understand what our students have written. Okay? In your packet with the One Lucky Fish, you also have the other text-dependent questions that you may see applicable for moving forward or some of that experience and exposure on the reader's side. Okay? I want to move forward with where there are additional resources so that when you're looking to plan with your PLC and how you want to pace this out between now and getting to M-STEP, again, experience and exposure, how might that work for you within your classroom? And then thinking that you might want to start off with it being partnerships or small groups that students are tackling this first before they have that opportunity to do it independently. Or you might be thinking, I want to see what my class can do on their own first. And that's certainly an approach to go as well. Okay? So I'm going to go back to the Google slides. So the next question is then, how do we get our students ready? Okay? Ready where they're comfortable and have a level of confidence. Okay? To being able to complete and be proficient with the text-dependent analysis task, the TDA, the assessment piece, instruction needs to happen and practice needs to happen in regards to close reading. And for those of you that I've worked with and we've talked about close reading and we've worked on that, the annotation of the text, and then looking at those reading strategies. What does the text mean? What am I looking for? And then, as the classroom teacher, posing those text-dependent questions. What are those efficient questions that are going to get our students to be that deeper thinker? And in Fisher and Fry's work, I want to make sure I point out, this type of work happens independently, but the conversation happens with others. The analysis part on M-STEP, that's that on-demand where they have to do it by themselves that one particular time. But as far as close reading goes, and we very much adhere to Fisher and Fry's work, that work is done in a small group. Oh, good. This particular slide should be quite familiar to all of us, thinking about that process. And it can also work for doing the TDA. The good news about M-STEP, if you will, is when we get to over here to this side, the editing and the publishing, there's no time constraint. Our students have the opportunity to revise and then edit before they submit. If we're really thinking about how we can support our students, it's really going to be in the pre-write, and I like to call the plan. This just is one way to think about chunking the opportunities for our students. With those subsequent rereads. Notice that after I read for the gist, then I'm going to come back and reread for the question. Okay? So I'm going to, my text-dependent analysis passage, going to read it for the gist, but I don't want to wait too long until I read what the task is, so that I can have that in my mind as I'm continuing to read and annotate. Another way to look at it in that ladder of complexity with our Michigan standards, moving all the way up to, on the writing, with standard number 9, that integration. Getting to the hierarchy of looking at the structure, the organization, then the inferencing, what does it mean, and then pulling it all together. And the links on these particular slides do work. So you can, if you care to, can actually go to those links for additional information about close reading. For me, and the work that Doug Fisher and Nancy Fry put together, when we're thinking about down here lower on the ladder as a first read after the gist, what does the text say? We can really help our students to think about it in that way. Those three questions. What does the text say? Then I'm going to read the passage again. How does the text say it? Looking for that organizational structure. Is it compare and contrast? Is there a lot of dialogue? Does the author use repetitive language? Does the author use vocabulary, tier 3 vocabulary? That's all about how does the text say it. Looking at the structure of the text, the length of the sentences, all of that comes into play. And then the highest level, what does the text mean? And in this case with the TDA, not what does the text mean to the task. Okay? Most often, as a close reader, what does the text mean? We want to take it back. What does the text mean to me when I'm when I'm reading a passage and when I'm talking about my science content? And then after I've decided that for myself, then I need to have that conversation in small group. Do we concur? Does the evidence in the text support it? All of this also happens much more places than just in our ELA block. A lot of good work that can happen with this, with science and social studies, and even with math. These next slides I'm going to go through rather quickly. These are set up for you as you're working with your group of students. So each slide can be an opportunity for sort of a chunk of learning. Okay? So thinking about standards number 1 and 2, the key ideas and details. So if I'm planning for close reading of a passage, one that is going to be available as a sample, or one that's in Wonders, or one that's in your science or social studies content, you can look at the first read in this regard. The story arc, thinking about the problem, the solution, the events, then the climax, and the resolution. Then going back for a second read, looking at those key ideas. I know that we continue in Grand Blanc across our grade levels, finding details that support the main idea. Okay? So what's the main idea? Sometimes that's provided. Other times we're asking our students to determine what is the main idea.